So you'll notice there's only one of me. Unfortunately, the Ben and Dion show can't make an appearance today. Ben has got, I think, H1N1 flu, and we've been in Europe for the past few days, and he's been like holed up in a hotel room, and finally it was just too crazy, so he had to fly back. So I really apologize that you get the kind of the worst half of the deal today. So if you want to get your money back, talk to those guys. We founded Ajaxian. We went to Mozilla and worked on this Bespin thing that Malte actually did amazing work on. We had a lot of fun doing that, and we're going to talk a little bit about kind of stuff that we did with Bespin there. And for the last month, we've been working at Palm, trying to kind of really push the web through the mobile web space. And I'll kind of talk a little bit about that too. But one quick kind of aside to begin with, you may have noticed recently that Google, like 2 days ago, announced Clojure, that they took their tools and finally open sourced them. I used to work for Google, and this has taken quite a few years. And when I first got to Google, they're really good at sharding. Everyone knows that. But once you actually get there, the code base is in Perforce, and it's like one massive repository, which is kind of strange. But the side effect is you can look at all the code. So being a JavaScript hacker, I went to the Gmail source code and quickly ran away as fast as possible after seeing it, but they used this Clojure library. Two of the guys here, of the three, actually worked on this. Eric Arvidsson, who has been doing this stuff for a very long time, and Dan Pupius are kind of the two guys that started this effort off. And I just wanted to give you just a couple of seconds, bit of information just to see it, because it's actually a series of tools. It's not just kind of like a library that you're used to. So this is the library side of things, and it looks familiar to Dojo in the require, provide kind of stuff, and it's massive kitchen sink, just like Dojo. And they also did this kind of thing, which if you're kind of from the Java community, way back in the day, we had this xdoclet thing that did this stuff until we got annotations in the language. And they've done kind of the same thing, where they add kind of features to the world by annotating it in comments. So if you really like writing Java code for your JavaScript, you've got another option right here with Clojure. But they have these vast array of libraries within that you can peek at, and it's really fun just to look around at the code, because people have kind of been finding out there's some of the stuff that they've done is just, it's really obviously stood the test of time. And there's stuff like the key binding support, I think someone talked about, the internationalization stuff, localization stuff is really interesting. It's just kind of cool to take a peek in the source code, not that you're going to run out and start using Clojure, but check it out. Now, the library is one part, but they also have a compiler. And the compiler is available just through the command line, or you can use this web service. And it's really fun just to kind of play around with it and put in your code and do things like turn on this advanced setting over here, and it like optimizes the hell out of things, and it looks at the annotations to do smart things as it does that compilation. So if earlier on you did like, this is a constant, it'll go through and inline that code and stuff like that. So there's a whole suite of things that it gives you, and you can just put your own code in here, and it does a better job than the YUI compressor on some code. Sometimes it breaks and doesn't even work, but another thing to kind of check out. Now, oh, wait, oops. Does anyone know who this guy is? This is Steve Souders, who will be at the show, and originally I was scheduled to talk after his talk, so it would have made a little bit more sense, but I want to play a little bit of a trick on him. When he starts his talk, if everyone can just start doing a little buzz, just like bzzz, just to kind of get him. There is a reason why Steve is showing up. This is his Halloween party where he's pollinating his wife, Carrie. His performance techniques are actually baked into that compiler. So when you run the compiler, it actually does performance tests on the fly and gives you interesting outputs. So all the stuff he's talking about kind of shows up a little bit here, which is kind of fun. There's also some other really fun things that he did. There's Firebug extensions that take care of some of the stuff that you get that's messy. So once you do, compilers and you get this, obfuscated code out, then when you're trying to debug that, it's a pain. So what they did is they do a bunch of stuff in the Firebug extension, including having this source mapping, where you can say, here's my source of the original, and so if instead of getting there's an error on line 1, because everything's line 1, it's one big line, it'll map it back to what's going on. So it's just kind of cool to see, like, it's not just a library, it's this whole suite of tools, and I think there's some interesting things to learn from here, not that you're going to obviously just kind of run out and use Clojure. Anyway, that's the aside. So I'm talking about the future of the web, whatever that means, and obviously kind of a high-level topic. We're going to talk about a bunch of different things. But when I started with Ben at Jaxion, at the time we were given all these talks on like how to build rich web applications, and hardly anyone was showing up. Everyone was trying to innovate on the server side, and no one cared about the client side. And then Jesse James coined the whole Ajax term, and then that was actually one day before a server-side conference that we're at. We did a search and replace on our slides from DHTML to Ajax, and like it was a full house. But a lot of the people here at this conference are kind of responsible for going in, getting all these like hacks and quirks and little APIs that the browsers had. And it kind of felt to me when this stuff was happening that we'd kind of like found flight. With Ajax, we could build these finally kind of rich applications on the web, but it was all kind of a hack, and it was all kind of pokey, and the runtime was really crappy. But it's amazing, like we flew with wood. Like, how did that happen? And we kind of did that. The people in this room kind of did that. But it feels like now things are changing, and we're finally getting these amazing runtimes and new APIs and HTML5 and all of this stuff that's going to enable us to get away from kind of the crappy stuff that we had to deal with and really kind of build some disruptive applications in the future. And that's why kind of at this time I'm like amazingly excited, much more so than when the Ajax revolution kind of hit to begin with, what we have available. And it's kind of fun to look at what's happened when you look at what's happened to browsers out there, from the kind of clunky Netscape, let's put everything in a browser and do your email and everything else, to Firebug, where we kind of streamline things, and then to Chrome, which kind of takes it, trying to take it to the extreme with have the browser get out of the way. The browser's gotten simpler on the outside. As far as like my mum's concerned, it's the same thing, it's just like a little bit less stuff. But we all know that the engine is drastically changed underneath. We've finally got something that's kind of up to the class that we have with the JVM and the CLR and things like that, which are going to enable us to really kind of do stuff with that jet plane. So Ajax used to mean this. When we did our first like Ajax experience, it was kind of a grassroots thing, just like this conference. I think these conferences like by far the most exciting. And all the talks are all about like little things on top of this Ajax thing. And quickly we saw a whole slew of libraries come out to like really make it easy to do that kind of stuff and give us effects and interesting things. And then we kind of grew the universe, and now like once a week I get a new email for like a new Ajax library. We've kind of nailed the remoting thing at this point, I think. But as we look to the horizon, we're really seeing kind of going way beyond having this one little, spent way too much time on these slides. I apologize for that. It's just Keynote. It's so fun, It's so easy. And when Ben and I kind of looked at the horizon, we're like talking about all this great HTML5 stuff, and we're like, well, we need to like really build something on top of this and see what we can really do. And that's why Bespin actually came about. We wanted to kind of play around with all of the new technology, and we're geeks, obviously, so we thought, what's an application that you wouldn't really think of to do on the web and make it happen? And so for us, it's a code editor. That's what we live in all the time. If we could make something that's kind of desktop class, desktop quality, then that'll say a lot. And so we went about trying to do this, and we tried it actually a few times, and the platform wasn't ready the first couple of times that we tried it. It was just really clunky and really kind of annoying, and it didn't work for us. But it's only recently that we finally got it to work. And so if you haven't seen, this is Bespin, web-based code editor, and this is all Canvas doing the rendering. And we were able to like really focus on the performance side. That's all we really focused on at first, was to be able to scale up, because we saw a bunch of different editors that are out there on the web, and we've all been there, little kind of web-based text areas. And once you get past a few thousand lines, it all just kind of breaks down. You've got a million DOM nodes, and it's craziness. And it was only when we got to using Canvas that we were able to scale this thing up. And in our prime, we had this one session where we had 50,000 lines of code with 83 people simultaneously edited on it, and it held up. And that's what we were really trying to do, was be able to kind of like prove that the web can do this kind of stuff. And Bestman's got a long way to go, but that's kind of the key thing that was like, okay, I think that we're kind of there, and it's really exciting. So the technology that we use, not just in Bestman, but that we're particularly excited about with the web right now is the graphics side, obviously with things like Canvas, finally having a decent JavaScript engine and a whole slew of them that we're seeing going on right now in the industry. Web workers and the notion to finally be able to do background tasks that don't just kind of freeze the browser. And then also kind of breaking through this web sandbox and being able to like access the underlying core services on whatever device or laptop you're on is also exciting. And then going beyond that to the world of mobile, which we're obviously excited about with our new position. Okay, so we're able to do stuff like Gmail with primitives like text, little divs, and images, and that's it. And like, how many posts have I put up on Ajaxian about how to best do a rounded corner? Like, it's crazy, right? That we have to work in this world where everything's a hack to do any kind of thing that you want to do on a UI world. And again, it's amazing that we're able to do these great applications with these primitives. But now we can go beyond that, and we can do cool things like this using Canvas, and it's natively working with the browser. So this guy in here is just like images that we can do things with and rotate and do interesting experiences. We can do real-time physics within our application, and then of course we can have gratuitous games. And finally, we can do whatever we need in our particular experience. So we can have a really immersive experience, kind of for the first time. And when you take that further and you marry it with other things that we're getting, like video, this is an example from the Mozilla guys in France, where a video is playing, they're capturing the frames, they're doing analysis to find the white lights that are coming out of their iPhones, and then they're real-time putting in different elements, which can be videos, their own Canvas little games and things, on the fly. This is kind of like, holy crap, like the web can actually do this stuff now in real time. Like, this is pretty amazing. Like, we haven't really kind of taken use of a lot of this stuff. And again, because Canvas is native to the web, it allows us to really tie into all of the other technology that we have available, which I think is incredibly exciting. So we've been able to do this with Flash and now Silverlight, so what's the big deal? Well, there's a few things that make Canvas a little bit different. Startup delay is one of those things. Like with Bestman, we really didn't want to have the kind of loading situation where you have to wait there for a little bit. And we're able to do that because everything's already booted up. It's just using the browser pipeline. Then there's also the ability that you can use this on mobile devices right now. A whole bunch of them support Canvas. So you can start doing these kind of rich things on mobile devices. You have rendering fidelity with the browser, and if Ben were here, he's like particularly anal about this stuff. He can like look at any font and know everything about the aliasing and what's going on and all that kind of stuff. And so it like really bugs him when he's working with a Flash application or something that just doesn't look quite right. And we've probably all kind of felt that in different areas with Flash. And because Canvas is just using the browser to do the rendering, it really just kind of fits in. And the text looks right and everything just kind of fits in nicely. And there's no bridges, so if you want to talk through, there's a lot of things that we've done where we kind of bridge over to Flash and then get things back, and that's great, but we don't need that because we're just using the JavaScript engine itself to power the graphics ability, and it's not a plugin, so we don't have the separate lifecycle and the separate beast that we have to worry about. It's just built in. So in fact, Canvas is great. It's just a way to have this kind of immediate mode API to draw things to the page. But then we get these guys who come along that kind of rant at us about like, oh, this Canvas element, it's like I go into my Firebug Explorer and it's just Canvas and I can't see what's in there. this just isn't the web. It should be all DOM. It should be really easy for me to go in and kind of peek at it. And for that, we have SVG, which does have its own DOM and all these things. And there's been problems with SVG. It kind of came out of the XML world and XHTML, and there's been a lot of issues with what that means, just kind of getting it working with HTML. But we're finally getting past that. And Brad Newberg of Google has recently released this thing, SVG Web, which allows it to also run on IE using Flash as a bridge to actually rendering what's going on. So if you're one of those kind of purists that likes having a world where you have a DOM and there's things that are a lot nicer about it, you don't have to roll your own eventing and things like that, then SVG is definitely becoming more of an option. We're obviously more Canvas guys. Getting fonts, Jonathan Snook gave a talk at Frontiers in Amsterdam all about fonts and the power of typography and what we can do. And finally, on the web, we can actually do really rich fonts and really kind of take the experience into our own hands. And it's kind of ugly right now. There's all these different warring formats and stuff going on that we're used to in kind of dealing with browsers. But it's really exciting that we can play around with this stuff. And there are sites out there and tools like Typekit that are really kind of helping us get over the cross-browser nonsense, where we can just slap in a bit of JavaScript and get the font that we want to deliver the experience we want without having to use like a Flash wrapper or something to give us that particular font using Cifra or Kufon or what have you. Okay, so we've got these like amazing graphics abilities, new fonts, really cool stuff, but none of this would really be possible if the engines themselves hadn't radically changed. Like, we've been living with these crappy VMs for a long time, little interpreters running our code, and in that Gmail code base that I ran away screaming from, like 50% of the code was trying to get it to perform well in certain browsers. And it's just not the fun stuff that we as web developers want to be working on. We want to be adding cool features and delivering great user experiences. But at the same time, roughly, Brendan Eich of Mozilla went and kind of found his academic peers, mainly on the East Coast, and took the ActionScript VM from Adobe and built TraceMonkey, this trace-based JITting platform that allows you to really, on the real time, observe the code and compile paths that you're using repeatedly into native code. We get amazing performance improvements from that. And then Google went and grabbed Lars from Denmark and had him kind of come out, and he built the Smalltalk VM, he built the hotspot in Java, and he's kind of done it again in the JavaScript world. And what's exciting about this is it's not just like twice as fast, it's exponentially faster. And Stephen Levi, who writes for Wired and other things, when he first started playing around with Chrome and seeing this V8 stuff, he just suddenly kind of realized that when something gets redone exponentially faster, it's not just different, it enables new things to happen. And we're seeing that, I think, with being able to have this core engine, and they've only just begun, right? Like, there's tons of stuff that they're doing, and this is just kind of the water's rising for all of us to like really be able to do the things that we want to be doing. One little thing that's kind of interesting under the scenes is the whole world of memory management. JavaScript has traditionally just been mark and sweep. And so you see this in your applications a lot if you're like running a little JavaScript game and things just kind of pause now and then, right? It's pausing because it's doing GC, and it has to go through the entire memory set to go through and kind of deallocate what's going on in the memory. Well, V8 finally introduced generational garbage collection, which other platforms like Java have had in a long time, where you have kind of the young generation here of new objects, which we've found 80% of the objects that we create are things like in a for loop that we can reclaim quickly, and there's only a few objects that kind of live around later. And so instead of having to go through the entire memory space, we can go along, clean up what's going on in the new space, and then come along later and move things that have kind of been hanging around for a while. And so this will finally help us get rid of these pauses that we see in our applications when we build them on the web runtime. So we're really excited about that too. And then there's new things that are out there, like V8 has this notion of snapshots and just like really, really wicked cool stuff that's going on the low level that, again, is just kind of a general enabler. But then we have this question. And it's easy to kind of make fun of these guys, and it's kind of fun too. But the good news is that recently, tons of different Microsoft people have kind of been coming up to us sometimes like, oh, don't tell anyone this, but you can imagine we're working on this really cool new JavaScript VM. And we see them kind of coming out and helping with the Canvas spec, where so far helping means taking it out of HTML5, but hopefully they're actually going to implement Canvas and things like that. And we actually think they're going to do this time. So hopefully in IE9, we'll start to get this stuff. So 15 years from now, we'll be able to actually use these technologies. So we've got this really fast JavaScript, which is great. But there's always going to be something that you do computationally that's going to take longer than 0.1 second, and therefore our user's going to notice it. So here's Pixtastic, which is like a little kind of Photoshop thing. And what we're going to do is desaturate this image over here, and notice it's kind of freezing the entire browser, and it's going to go long enough because it takes 5 seconds to give us the script warning. And it doesn't matter how fast the JavaScript is, there's always going to be things that take this long. And so, this is obviously a horrendous experience for our users, and we need to get beyond that. So what we'd normally do in kind of the desktop world is we'd have a background thread that actually does the desaturation. But we don't have threads in JavaScript, and we're not going to get them because Brendan Eich, did this whole big post about how, threads suck, and we have people like Doug Crockford who don't want any innovation to happen at all. Just kidding. So we're not going to get new features. No, we're not going to get threads, but we actually have something that, arguably is better with workers, because with workers you don't have all of the issues that you have with threads, with shared state, and just all of the pain that we have to do when we work with threads. And I've worked with genius software programmers that still always get the threading stuff wrong, and it's just like incredibly painful to actually get this stuff right. And so I'm excited that we've actually taken a different approach to get stuff working with web workers to enable us to do this. So here's a little example of what happens when you start using web workers. When this guy spins the Firefox icon, that means that the browser's responsive, and we're going to do a little annealing calculation. And, oops, the browser's already frozen, and it's going to calculate the fastest path between all these points. And at this point, like, the entire browser is just frozen for the user, and we have to wait for a few seconds for it to be done, and then the browser comes back again. That's obviously not very good. Oops. When you do it with workers, though, that's not the case, because it's going to do all of that calculations in this background process. So it's going to send a message over to a worker that's running somewhere else. It's going to do the calculation, then it's going to speak back to the main browser thread, and it's going to say, okay, here you go. So now, with workers, we can, like, all of our mouse overs are still working, everything's totally responsive, and then we get the results. So we have the JavaScript execution speed, and now we have the beginnings of the ability to actually do things off of the main UI thread, which enable us to deliver these great experiences. And we used this stuff. Actually, Malta did the work for this to have things like the syntax engine in Bespin run off of the main UI thread, because you don't want to freeze someone typing as you're doing the syntax calculations. And if you're doing code completion, you don't want to hit period and then start to type and the browser freezes while it works out the completions. You want to push that off into a background worker. Where this actually came from is related to the database stuff that we have on the web. When the Gmail guys were trying to do Gmail offline, kind of through the guise of gears, the problem we had was whenever we were doing anything with the database from Gmail, the browser would freeze because that UI thread of the browser was locked talking to the database. And so at first, they could just kind of do a little hack and make all the database access work on a different process, a different thread. But that didn't scale to other problems. And that's where kind of web workers were born as this worker pool API, where it's like, let's give developers the ability to do that somewhere else. We have this offline storage now, which you need for the client-side applications. And once again, though, we're in this kind of weird little fight where a bunch of the browsers support SQL, but Other people like Mozilla really don't believe SQL is the right answer for local storage on the web. It doesn't feel webby enough for them. They prefer kind of the CouchDB kind of model. But beyond that kind of almost religious debate, there's also the issue of what does it mean to say that it's SQL? Ian Hickson, when it kind of seemed like the SQL stuff was going on, was literally going to go through SQLite and standardize that dialect of SQL. And so we're basically binding everyone to use SQLite, but IE can't use SQLite, and Opera can't use SQLite. So it's really a bit of a predicament. So hopefully we'll see some other things kind of take off there. Now, the GPU hasn't been really available to us through the web platform before. Everything's been kind of software. But we're seeing us being able to kind of wire into the GPU in interesting ways. And again, this is another kind of technology that we need to be able to enable really interesting applications. One way of doing this we're seeing is with WebGL, where we can just take kind of the OpenGL world, and now in Firefox and in WebKit nightlies and in Chrome nightlies too, you can actually start having these really rich experiences, which is fantastic to see. And we have the O3D stuff from Google, which is kind of another take, which is a kind of higher level API. And we can do amazing things like this. It's fantastic. Look at that experience. But teapots even. But the problem is that web hackers, a lot of them don't think in this OpenGL kind of world. So it's kind of tough to say, like, here's how you could do a really rich experience. Go learn OpenGL. Kind of a dialect is not really what we want to do. Luckily, Apple's really stepped up here, and they're delivering these GPU-accelerated 3D things just through CSS. And so you get a lot of benefits out of this. You get this rotating cube here, but you can then do text selection, and it all just kind of works. It's all like built into what's going on, and it's all hardware accelerated for you, and you don't have to think about it. It's just declarative. And if you take something a little bit more fancy, this is just a whole set of divs, and you can do immersive experiences like this without having to do much at all. This is just all CSS transforms, and it appears laggier on the screen here than it actually is because of the video that we're taking. If you actually kind of play with it, it feels like you're really kind of immersed in this experience, and it's pretty trivial to be able to deliver this stuff now. So we've got amazing rich things coming. The Mozilla team is working on CSS transforms. I'm sure other people are too. And it's really exciting to see how we can just declaratively do amazing things like this and also push it through with JavaScript too. So we're able to do amazing graphic stuff. We've got applications like this, really rich applications, but as soon as you start working in this world, you want to kind of break through from these applications. So you're working with your email app, you'd really like to be able to tie into your address book or something, for example. And we're not able to do that traditionally through the web because the web gives us this kind of sandbox world, which makes sense on the security side, but doesn't help on the functionality side. Luckily, we've got some kind of technologies that can help us do some of this stuff. Fluid and Prism are two technologies that allow us to kind of take our apps and kind of bless them and have them run in kind of like their own shell and be able to do things. Prism is cross-platform, Fluid is Mac only, and you can then kind of put user scripts in there. So in the Gmail world, I can plug in a user script that says, now when I get an email, do a little ground notification for me. And like really customized stuff that's really quite cool. But it's the kind of stuff that we would use, but it's not the kind of stuff like my mum's going to use. And then another approach is Air and Titanium, which enable you to just take your web skills and build desktop applications. And that's interesting too, but what I'm more excited about beyond this stuff is we're actually seeing the browsers kind of take on this challenge. So Mozilla's been spending a lot of time thinking about what it would mean to have a really rich trust model using something like Jetpack to kind of give you the extensibility, and then kind of layering on technical security on top of that, and then social trust networks on top of that even. So my mom can see, oh, Dion uses this little plugin, so I'll trust him, and I'll use it too, and give me enhanced abilities. Chrome has the notion that it's playing with called app tabs, which allows you to take your Gmail tab and kind of bless it and say, I want Gmail to do more things. and it just kind of pins it in and allows you to do richer things for those particular users. So I'm excited to see us kind of break through that sandbox, and that's one of the reasons that Ben and I joined Palm, is that that's exactly what they did. When we saw WebOS kind of showing off at CES last year, when they got up and said, like, the phone is just like, the platform is the web, it made a lot of sense to us. And a lot of people come up to us, and we just had an event in London kind of talking about mobile web stuff, and they're like, yeah, it's great that you can like build your app using the web, but surely your native apps, like your mail app, calendar, SMS, that's not built on the web, right? Use native stuff in that. And it's not at all. The whole proof point of the WebOS stuff was all of the apps in there are just web apps. And in fact, we make the source code available to you guys, so you can even take a look at the mail app and see what it's like. What's it like to actually write an application like that? And then they had to put in a bunch of device APIs that we then have to use to get access to the native world. And so this is kind of one thing on the mobile side where it's kind of pushing through and breaking through the sandbox to give us really rich functionality. Does anyone know who this guy is? Not Amy? It's Dave Thomas, not the Wendy's guy in the US, but a guy who writes some Ruby code. He always says on panels, like, you know, when you're like, my name's Dion Almaer and I'm an Ajax guy. He says, my name's Dave Thomas and I'm a programmer. That's all he ever says. But he runs the Pragmatic book series. And Ben and I were at a No Fluff, Just Stuff symposium tour. And someone asked this panel that we were on, you know, what's the future of software? And this is the time where Flex had just come out, Adobe Air was just being kind of bandied around called Apollo, and the WPF stuff from Microsoft. And so Ben got up and gave this like rousing speech about rich internet applications and immersive experiences and all these great graphics. And then Dave got up and he just took his phone that he had at the time and put it in the air and said, this is the future of software. And Ben started to argue with him about like, look at this crappy screen, it's like a green screen, like how is this the future? We've got these amazing graphics abilities on the desktop, like this isn't the future of software. But we're finding that, you know, they're both kind of right, and the mobile experiences stuff is really taking off. And it makes sense. We've gone from the world of, you know, the PDA to the smartphone, and finally with the iPhone, we realized that we've actually just got computers in our pockets that also happen to be able to make phone calls, sometimes badly. But it's like, finally, I have the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, right? I've got a 3-year-old boy that asks me questions, and I can kind of, you know, get on the web and ping Wikipedia and tell him what it is. Like, it's amazing what we have available, and it's just really exciting because now we've got things, you know, that are really small, that we have this whole world of devices out there, and we're only limited to our imagination on the form factor. Like, we're going to see watches that are these devices, right? We're going to see my glasses will be able to do this stuff. Like, it's not far out there. And I get really excited about it, but then I also get really worried when I look at all of these boxes and I see that every one of these is like a different proprietary API that I have to learn. And sometimes it's like this weird C dialect. just have to have fun there. But you know, what would the world be like if we could unify that? And it was kind of fun to think about, like, most of these devices have this little guy in it with WebKit that just kind of snuck out of KHTML and in Safari that has, you know, still a pretty small share, but a decent share. But now it's like everywhere in mobile devices. Like, it's amazing. The web is already there. You can do great experiences on the web across these different things. And then we obviously at Palm kind of tried to take that to the next level to make it the way to build native apps. And so the reason that we really went to Palm was to see if we could make the web the unifying platform for all of these things. Like, can we get to a world where we take web technology and we can deploy it to a whole slew of devices that are coming out there? Like, right now we think of the mobile web as being, you know, 320 by whatever on an iPhone screen, but that whole world is changing, right? I know that I'm going to sit in my car and my phone's going to talk to the little nav screen and display my email. Like, I can't wait for this stuff. It's really exciting, but how do we deliver these applications? And so we think that the web's going to be able to deliver that. And that's not just about Palm WebOS, it's about a whole slew of other really exciting technologies. You know, Brian's here going to be talking about PhoneGap, being able to take your web skills and deploy it across a whole slew of devices that are out there. And Titanium Mobile has got a set of tools that are different to PhoneGap, but are interested in their own route. And so I'm excited at Palm to kind of work together with the whole web community to build the web platform as the way to deliver these experiences. We don't want to have like a Palm-specific proprietary API. We want it to just be the web. Okay, a little segue. At these conferences, we get excited about the engine. I get excited about all the new cool JavaScript APIs and what's coming with HTML5, and finally we have APIs that are aimed at building web apps and not web documents and websites. But it's not really the engine that matters, and I have to keep remembering it's actually the experience that really matters. And we kind of see this in a car. I remember when Ben and I first saw this ad. I don't think Ben ever knew what an Aston Martin was before he saw this. Let's just watch this for a sec. So I'm not even a car guy, which is heresy in Germany, I know, but like I want to buy that car now. Like that looks really fun. I think I would have a good time in that car, even if it's not a German car. But that's what matters. Like, you know, if I put my foot down to the floor, like it may not be as fast as some other car, but you know, a lot of the kind of motorheads don't care about that stuff. And so we're seeing a dramatic change that we only probably just saw when we went from this world, where everything was just kind of, you know, simple screens like this, and this is kind of like the Web 1.0 world or what have you, to now with the HTML5 world with Rick's experiences. But the problem is that the complexity has totally changed. Like, the web used to be really ugly and crappy, which was great for me because I'm not a graphics guy. So I could build things equally crappy and ugly. But everything's changed. You've got all this WebGL and all this cool stuff now. The bar is being raised. And the complexity, like building something even like a rich client, you have to think about things that you just didn't have to think about with typical kind of terminal screens. And one thing we have to really kind of spend time on is kind of the craftsmanship side of things. And this guy, Alan Cooper, wrote a whole book kind of talking about craftsmanship and kind of going against something that Joel on software talked about, to do with like, hey, if you're in IT, like you don't have time to be a craftsman, and kind of debunk that. But he also just said it's our duty to really be craftsmen as we build, in our case, these really rich applications. And one example that Ben and I saw recently was just when the new version of Firefox 3.5 came out, we watched the UX team kind of iterate on it. And like, how can you like make this better? Like Firefox is an icon that everyone knows, you're not going to change it. And we just watched them like slowly iterating through this icon. Like, I'd be like, that's good enough, like, that's fine. No, they keep going, keep making subtle changes. They're like arguing about what's better, this, that, and the other. Which part of the world is it showing? We don't want to show one place and make it seem like that place is better than somewhere else. They just keep going, and that's what they end up with. And it's like, wow, this is like craftsmanship. You need to keep iterating and like building your craft and building great products, and that delivers these amazing experiences. And this brings us to kind of what's happening a lot to do with the fact that when the bar raises, expectations totally change. And we saw this comedian do a little bit that really hit home for us as we see these expectations. So we're going to just kind of play this for you for a sec.
Everything is amazing right now, and nobody's happy. Like, in my lifetime, the changes in the world have been incredible. When I was a kid, we had a rotary phone. We had a phone that you had to stand next to, and you had to dial it.
Yes.
You realize how primitive? You're making sparks. in a phone. And you actually would hate people with zeros in their numbers because it was more like, oh, this guy's got 2 zeros. Screw that guy. Why do I want to? And then if they called and you weren't home, the phone would just ring lonely by itself. And then if you wanted money, you had to go in the bank for when it was open for like 3 hours. You had to stand in line, write yourself a check like an idiot. And then when you ran out of money, you just go, well, I can't do any more things now.
Right.
I can't do any more things.
That's it, yeah.
That was it. And even if you had a credit card, the guy would go, ugh, and he'd bring out this whole shunk, and he'd write, oh, you'd have to call the president to see if you have any money. And
it's all true, kids. You had to call the president, yeah. It was ridiculous.
Yes.
Do you feel that we now, in the 21st century, we take technology for granted?
Well, yeah, because now we live in an amazing, amazing world, and it's wasted on the crappiest generation of just spoiled idiots that don't care, because this is what people are like now. They got their phone, and they're like, it won't. Give it a second. It's going to space. Can you give it a second to get back from space? Is the speed of light too slow for you? I was on an airplane, and there was internet, high-speed internet on the airplane. That's the newest thing that I know exists. And I'm sitting on the plane, and they go, open up your laptop. You can go on the internet. And it's fast, and I'm watching YouTube clips. I'm in an airplane. And then it breaks down. And they apologize. The internet's not working. The guy next to me goes, this is bull. Like how quickly the world owes him something he knew existed only 10 seconds ago.
Right.
And on planes, flying is the worst one because people come back from flights and they tell you their story. And it's like a horror story. They act like their flight was like a cattle car in the 40s in Germany. That's how bad they make it sound.
Right.
They're like, it was the worst day of my life. First of all, we didn't board for 20 minutes. Right. And then we get on the plane, and they made us sit there on the runway for 40 minutes. We had to sit there. Oh, really? What happened next? Did you fly through the air incredibly like a bird? Did you partake in the miracle of human flight, you non-contributing zero?
So, this really hits home, right? It's like you suddenly realize that, crap, like, first of all, I keep complaining about flights. I won't do that anymore. And secondly, like, once expectations change, you look at the old thing and it's like, what? And we see this in our industry in, like, games. Like, this was cool. This was amazing. I've got a paddle and it can, like, play this game. But now we expect this. And, like, kids of today playing this would be like, are you kidding me? Like, that's crazy. I want immersive applications that look beautiful 24/7 with, like, all my friends that can do great things. Like, expectations change, and that happens on the web. As soon as Google Maps came out, you go to MapQuest and be like, MapQuest? Like, that sucks. You mean I hit up and it has to reload the page? That's crazy. That's so bad. And I think we're about to see kind of a similar shift as we get all these really cool HTML5 apps that do all of these really rich things again. The things that today people are used to and think are okay are suddenly going to seem really, really primitive. And so I think that's where I'm kind of like, oh man, I need to like start doing this other stuff. Otherwise I'm going to be a dinosaur. Now, kind of how sexy and how cool things look actually makes a difference. And here's an experiment. Are there any ladies in there? It's a geek conference. Are there any women? No, there's a few, good. Any of the ladies out there would like to go out with this guy? He's kind of a bit of a kind of doughboy guy, a bit like myself. Anyone would like to have a coffee with this guy? No one? How about this guy? Ah, Sarah smile over there, that's good. They're the same guy. It's Jared Leto, an actor that put on this weight for a part. And what's funny is that while the implementation is the same, the interface is totally different. Right? He's a nice guy in both of these, but like we react very differently to how we'd want to interact with one of these interfaces over another. So there's the universal truths that some of the psychologists talk about. We talk a lot about like getting to know our users and how they want to use stuff, but there's a few uniform truths. One is sex sells, and we see that obviously in the media and movies and stuff. And one little fun example, we got the stats on the Transformers movies. So this is The original one that came out, kind of the height of when like all the kids, we all had Transformers and the cartoon was out and everyone loved it. And opening weekend, it made, a million, 1.7 million, that's pretty good. But then the new one came out, 70, just a little bit better, even if you take into account inflation. And then, there was a particular part of the movie that I think drew a certain group, and Hollywood worked that out. So the next one, 108 million. And if you saw the movie, it's kind of awful and was just an excuse to get her on screen. And so how things look actually matter, and that kind of goes through to software too, even though it can be kind of weird. So there was a study that was done all about different UI elements like buttons, and over here we've got like these two buttons, and it's weird to look at these and be like, one of these is better than the other one. But you could kind of look at this and be like, hey, that doesn't even really look like a button, so I could see how people may just think it's just got a border and stuff. But what if you put something that everyone really knows is a button? Well, it turns out that people really didn't like these interfaces, and people enjoyed using the other interfaces a lot more, even though they were the same. And there was a study that Don Norman, I believe, did, where he took an ATM system and had exactly the same interaction. One of the systems was just kind of the usual like black screen with green writing, and the other one was like a rich application. And they made sure the interactions took the same time and everything else. And at the end of the study, everyone like thought the one that had the pretty stuff was so much better, even though the interaction was the same. There's another study that is even scarier that talks about how people react to different things, in this case faces, where they took a whole slew of people and they took all of like the Senate races that happened in the US, and people had to predict who won the race just on looking at two people that were running against each other. And everyone instantly kind of picked the better looking person, and that was a 71% indicator that person actually won. And they studied that like within like the first half a second, people were making this judgment. And that's the same indicator as if they were already in office. Like, it's crazy that they'd look at people and be like, that guy's more capable. And the funniest part of this was at the end of the report, just to make sure, people like to sue each other in the US, they said, unfortunately, no good evidence suggests that inferences drawn from a person's facial appearance can predict character or skills. So they had to put a disclaimer saying the good-looking guys aren't necessarily better at their job, which is kind of bizarre. But there's a thing, this is called the halo effect, and we see that on the web. And another study done at the University of Ontario would take different websites, here's an example, and again, within like half a second, people would make assumptions based on this website. They would like, look at this thing versus another one, and they'd be like, is this a trustworthy business? Would I give my credit card to these guys? Are they competent? And would instantly make these judgments. And it was just kind of intrinsic to how we actually do stuff in our brains. So this stuff really, really matters. And to hammer it home again, here's a little case study that's fun. Does anyone use Delicious Library on the Mac? Does anyone use that? A few people over there. So Delicious Library, this is the first version. So the latest one, it does a lot more. But the first version that came out is this application that allows you to take your DVDs and books, and you could kind of put in the information. It gives you this like virtual deck that you could look at. And when I first saw this, it's like, oh, this is cool. Like, maybe I could like double click on the DVD and it would start playing it. Nope, can't do that. Maybe I could read the book, click on the book. Nope, can't do that. I could literally put in my information, look at this, or look at my bookshelf. And like, that was it. And the innovation was, this feature here was kind of cool at the time, where you could put the code up to the webcam and it would scan it and automatically put in the information. And you could like drag a book to a friend and it would say like you've loaned it to them. But that's it. You could use Excel really easily to do that. You could use one of the millions of like inventory systems out there. But he basically took something, made it look really nice, had amazing attention to detail. And did it matter? Well, yeah. He sold 500,000 in 3 months. Yet this is literally his car. He bought this car and has a bit of an ego, so he blogged about buying this car. And $54,000 of profit in the first day without doing any advertising at all. He literally took something that had a little bit of use, not too much, made it just beautiful to use, and people bought it. I bought it and I've used it like 3 times, and it's just like so nice to use. You want to use it. This stuff actually really works, and that then bought him time to go ahead and like innovate and add features and stuff. So this like directly really, really matters. But I'm not trying to say just like put lipstick on a pig and make it look better, because that goes wrong too. So remember the campaign? It was all about the wow starts now and all this kind of stuff. It's not just about the visual side of things. You've got to get the integration stuff worked out well. And Jeff Raskin talks a lot about this, and kind of shows you why Vista did so badly. Is like the experience of the interaction just poisons you. And like we've all been there. We've been working with different programs. You get frustrated. You want to like throw the mouse out the window kind of thing. Vista did that all the time, right? Where it just like pop up. Are you sure you want to click on that? Like, no, go away. And so we need to make sure that we obviously don't poison our users and give them fantastic experiences. So there's actually kind of 2 sides to design. There's the visual stuff, which I'm never going to be good at. I just don't have that feel. It's just like a fashion. And we talked about that's important. But then there's the interaction design, which is the geeky nerds, like watching exactly how people interact with things. And Jakob Nielsen talks about, one of the laws, which is you have to make sure every interaction, they're directly manipulating those objects. If you're able to do that, the user's brain can stay in the flow and they feel like they're really enjoying that experience. And this again ties back to the fact that now we can do that with web workers and the JavaScript engines. We can make sure that we do this kind of stuff. Whereas before, you think about, even before Ajax, every different thing you did would call a reload. Like that would obviously be longer than that for every bit of time. And there's a little tool out there, this one's actually on Ben's site, that allow you to kind of play around with that. Just click on these things and kind of see how you feel when you're working with these different kind of time lapses. And you really notice the difference, particularly around here. Ben thinks he's a really high-tuned individual, so he even knows the difference up here. But you really notice, it really, really matters. The other kind of thing that we have to do is make sure that everything a user does is sacred. And so we see that in different UIs with saving state and restoring our sessions now, and getting rid of the notion of actually saving something. And we all know how frustrating this is. Like the web has this notion of sessions, but users don't care about it. And like it drives me nuts when I go to something like a travel site and I get a phone call and I come back and it says, sorry, all that stuff you put in, like got to do it again. And we run into this again and again and again. And so we have to make sure that we actually do a better job. And these are just kind of 2. There's millions of things we could talk about with interaction design. But if we make sure that we do good on the responsiveness, which we can now do on the web, and make sure we really take good care of users' input, we can get a long way. So it feels like when we first started to do browser apps, like nothing changed for like 10 years in the browser. It was an incredibly frustrating place for us as web developers to try and innovate and deliver great applications. And then Ajax came along, which made the winter a little bit nicer to live with, but the browsers still weren't really helping us. But now we've got all of these fantastic technologies that all these great speakers are going to be talking about and you guys are going to be using that will enable us to finally deliver these expectations that are going to take us to the next level. And they're just going to make the web amazing and make people's lives actually a lot better. And so, the web has a ton of stuff going for it right now. I'm incredibly excited about where we're going. And most importantly, you've got job security on your side, because there's a TV show in the US that's a sci-fi show. And if you zoom into the user experience of the show, this is in like 2500, they use JavaScript. So make sure you keep up your JavaScript skills, and I'll see you at a JSConf in the future sometime soon. Thanks so much, guys.